morning, everybody, and welcome to Arts and Design Fridays. My name is Susan Moffett. I'm Creative Director of Future Histories Lab and Executive Director of the Global Urban Humanities Initiative. And on behalf of Professor Lisa Wymore and myself, I'd like to welcome not only the students, but also our public audience and visitors to our speaker series, which is Landscapes of Migration, Incarceration, and Resistance. And this morning, I would like to acknowledge that we are in the unceded homelands and current homelands of the Chochenyo-speaking Huichin Ohlone people. And I also want to point out that our focus this semester is Angel Island. And Angel Island is the ancestral territory of the Miwok people. And I invite everybody who's interested in learning more about the Coast Miwok history of Angel Island to visit futurehistories.berkeley.edu. Our first speaker this semester was Greg Saris, who is chairman of the Federated Indians of the Grayton Rancheria, and he gave a really great talk about the indigenous history of Angel Island. So I encourage everybody to take a look at that. And on our website, you can also find all of our past speakers as well. I want especially our visitors to know that today's talk with Jeffrey Lowe, Sita Sunil, and Skyler Chin, welcome. So excited to have you here. This talk is part of a whole year of programming, performances, exhibitions, courses, public talks, and creative projects called A Year on Angel Island, which is using the Angel Island Immigration Station as a jumping off point for thinking about issues of immigration, othering, and belonging. So please take a look at all the things that we have going on this semester and next semester as well. I want to make a few announcements before we welcome our speakers, and these announcements may be of interest both to our public audience as well as to our students. We have a lot of really great events coming up. I want to highlight that next week our speakers will be talking about a PBS documentary called Plague at the Golden Gate, which is about a turn-of-the-century outbreak of bubonic plague in San Francisco, which not surprisingly was blamed on the Chinese community. There are echoes of the present there. And the filmmakers, Li Xinyu, the director, and James Q. Chan, the producer, will be here speaking about that film. And students, you can screen that film in advance, which I highly recommend. It's on B courses, and for the public, if you're interested in watching Plague at the Golden Gate, you can find a link on futurehistories.berkeley.edu by going to the talk for next week. I also want to let folks know about our partnership with Osher Theater here in Berkeley. They have a great new play coming up called Colonialism is Terrible, but Pho is Delicious, by Dustin Chin and directed by Wan Wen. And that opens November 4th, but November 15th, we're having Berkeley Night, and you can get discounted tickets and be part of a post-show conversation there. And information about that is also on our website. Tomorrow, we'll be talking about this during our conversation, but there is a performance of the new musical Illegal by Sita and Skyler. And in the immigration detention barracks, they will be performing a concert version of this musical. And if you'd like to attend, it starts at 11, and we have information on how to attend and how to go to this really meaningful performance that will be happening tomorrow. I also want to highlight something that's coming up. Jeffrey Lowe has a new play in Palo Alto. It is The Little Shop of Horrors, but it is set in Chinatown, San Francisco, Chinatown. So that's a new version of Little Shop of Horrors. So that sounds like a lot of fun. That will be in December. A couple of other events that we have coming up. December 3rd, we have the Angel Island Oratorio for chamber chorus and the Del Sol Quartet. They'll be performing at Hertz Hall here at Berkeley. That's part of our programming, along with, in February, Within These Walls, Lenora Lee's dance piece about immigration at Angel Island. So those are just some of the things we have coming up. I want to let students know, again, if you want to ask questions, which I'm sure you'll have questions for our speakers and performers today, we will give you the option either of raising your hand and using the mic, but you can also pass index cards to the usher who will collect your questions. And Adiola and Lauren, we only have one usher here today, and so if you could collect the cards, that would be great. Okay. So today, I am so excited to be bringing us back to theater and how theater can help us think about issues of identity and migration. Earlier this semester, we had Ava Roy from We Players and Lenora Lee, the choreographer, talking about how they use the spaces of Angel Island and Alcatraz as both inspiration and stage for theater and dance and movement to explore the questions that we're exploring. Today we're going to be talking about musicals and more traditional theater that takes place inside a theater, and how stories about Paper Sons in particular can be explored there. We have two plays that are addressing that issue in particular. The Paper Dreams of Harry Chin was directed by Jeffrey Lowe at San Francisco Playhouse last summer. I saw it. It was an amazing, beautiful performance, got great reviews. Really moving play by Jessica Huang about the intergenerational impacts of people having to pretend to be who they're not, among other things. That is one play. The other play we're going to be talking about today is Illegal, a brand new musical that was written by and will be today performed, a couple of pieces by Sita and Skyler. And just to tell you a little bit more about our speakers today, Jeffrey Lowe is a Filipino-American playwright and director, both. He's based in the Bay Area. And he's the recipient of many awards, including the Lee Weimer's Emerging Artist Award, the Emerging Artist Laureate by Arts Council Silicon Valley, and he got the Theater Bay Area Directors Titan Award. As a playwright, his plays have been produced and workshopped at Berkeley Rep, Theater Works Silicon Valley, the Bindlestiff Studio, City Lights Theater Company, and Stanford University. He's a proud alumnus of the UC Irvine Drama Department. And among his many works are Balikbayan Box and Writing Fragments Home. He's also a founding member of OurDigitalStories.org, which were stories and plays written during the pandemic and performed as Zoom conversations. I'm so excited to be able to be back in person in theater, but they were beautiful pieces, and I encourage you, take a look at his 15-minute play called December in volume 5 in OurDigitalStories.org. It shows how you can do a lot with a little in hard times, which those were. Skyler Chin is a 6th-generation Chinese-American whose family stories inspired him to write Illegal. One grandfather was a paper son who entered the U.S. under an assumed name during the era of the Chinese Exclusion Act, and the other suffered months of separation from his family at age 10 when he was detained at Angel Island. Skyler was born in San Francisco and raised in New York. He graduated from Yale University in 2019 with a degree in environmental and energy studies. He's the winner of the Yale Creative Performing Arts Award and the Pauli Murray Class of 2019 Outstanding Achievement in the Arts Award. And Sita Sunil has resided since 2019 in New York City, and influenced by her study of both evolutionary biology and visual art at Yale, her work is rooted in the intersection of color, sound, emotion, nature, and Asian American identity. She has composed for short films, concert performances, and soundtracks, and she co-composed Illegal, which was recently named a semifinalist for the Eugene O'Neill National Music Theater Conference. And this work by Sita and Skyler was commended by U.S. Congresswoman Grace Meng, New York Assemblywoman Gina Saletti, and Senator Anna Kaplan for responding to anti-AAPI hate crimes via art. So this morning, we are going to hear a talk about the plays. We'll show a very brief clip about the Harry Chin play, have Jeffrey tell us a little bit more about that play, and then we are lucky to have Sita and Skyler do a short performance of a couple songs from Illegal before we jump into our conversation. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Skyler, Sita, and Jeffrey. And now I'm going to ask Skyler to run the piece.
Okay.
Harry Chin, so you do know my name.
You think about me.
You made a promise.
Do you ever find out what happened to me?
What is your true and correct name?
Oh my god! Mom?
Cannot be ghosts.
What?
Well, because ghosts don't come springtime.
You think it's a ghost?
Ghosts only come during 7 months. So now, no worry, no ghost, okay?
Laura. It's not possible. Laura can't be you.
What is your true and correct name?
Hong Chi Chin.
Have you ever been married?
No. Just says Chin.
That's what it's supposed to say.
Maybe you should say Liang.
Why would it say?
Liang is my name.
Do you want to stay in this country?
Yes.
Then I highly recommend you cut all ties immediately.
Is Harry Chin
Don't you
here?
have something you want to confess? We need to talk.
Nothing to talk about.
We need to talk as a family.
Okay, can't stop, I say!
It's funny, right? The whole country against us with laws and uniforms and dogs and guns. And we, fleeing famine, believe we can overcome with this. With nothing but paper. Paper that contains new names, new histories, new possibilities. Or so we hope.
Jeffrey, I think that short video gave us a sense of the emotions of the play. Can you tell us a little bit about what the play is about, enough of the plot for us to understand it, and what drew you to it?
Yeah, it's one of the things that drew me to the play is that it's actually quite challenging to explain succinctly, but I'll do my best. The Paper Dreams of Harry Chin is a play inspired by a true story of a gentleman named Harry Chin who ended up immigrating from China to Minneapolis by way of Seattle and was a paper son. And in the play, it was inspired off of the playwright Jessica Huang was commissioned to write this play by a theater in Minneapolis called the History Theater, where they commissioned plays about sort of true life events. And Jessica, being this amazing and creative playwright herself, she sort of took an atypical route when she, discovered these interviews between Harry and his daughter Sheila. And the play is sort of a couple of things. One big thing is it's sort of, as you said, it's exploring the intergenerational trauma that comes from the treatment of marginalized communities, and specifically the community of, the early Chinese immigrants who had to come as paper sons and had to sort of erase their identity in some ways. And so there's the journey of Harry sort of opening up to his daughter about what his journey was, the fact that he was a paper son and the fact that he has this whole backstory in life that she knew nothing about. And her sort of coming to a realization that her entire life she was raised by a father who, for many reasons, became pretty closed off. And the play surrounds the moments leading up to the Ghost Festival. And Harry is visited by three specifically, but various ghosts in his life. One was a poet who was on the boat with him as he was coming into the equivalent of Angel Island in Seattle. And then the second ghost was the wife he left in China. And the third ghost was his wife that he made in America, that he met and married in America, who eventually discovered he had a wife in China. And for various reasons, not just because she discovered that he had a wife in China, did take her own life. And through the journey of these ghosts, they sort of force him into reliving moments of his past and the moments that he had with them, going from, be it, his experience on the boat, to his experience with the interrogation, the really intense interrogation that he had to go through, and then his experience as a Chinese immigrant in America, in Minneapolis of all places. And then really the journey of the play is him wrestling with the negative things, the negative choices he was forced to make, and the things that he blamed himself for. And it was a journey of him learning to both accept and forgive himself for what he had to go through in his life, and then in turn healing in a way that allowed him to open up to his daughter and sort of create healing both for his connection with his daughter and hopefully healing the string of future generations of his family. I did my best. I think that wasn't so bad. That was an okay explanation, I think.
That was great, because the play itself, it's not in chronological order at all, and it jumps back and forth. And so I think a lot of the beauty of it was that we are jumping back and forth the way that we are in real life. Our past walks beside us, and sometimes it's kind of a jumble.
Yeah, and I think, if anyone ever sees a different production of the play, you'll get to see it. But also, what's so awesome is how rooted it is in like realism and connection, where like the final moment of the play is written where it's just a father feeding his daughter and them sitting together and eating. And that was like the moment of healing, where we go through this whole ghost journey. We went through all this work and rehearsal to come up with like the ghost logic of the world, because it's not really spelled out in the script. And then by the end of it, after the healing has happened, after the magic has happened, and after like the ghosts are sort of allowed to leave essentially the purgatory that they're in some ways, it's just a moment where it's like, I'm going to feed my daughter and we're going to share a meal, which I think is something that everybody can probably relate to, but especially people of that community. I think a lot of people just sort of recognize that beautiful moment.
And I want to hear more soon about what drew you to the play, but let's bring the illegal folks into this conversation. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the play and then do a couple songs.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Skyler. I created the musical Illegal with Sita, and it's a new musical set in 1923 about a group of young people who are trying to just make it from southern China to America, and it follows the story of a budding kung fu enthusiast named Keelan. Her brother and her are harassed by a colonial cop in Hong Kong. She decides to fight with the cop, and in the scuffle, her brother's accidentally killed, and then she makes the choice to sell his papers to a business partner, a paper son named Slim Chin, maybe Harry Chin, who and those two have to go on a journey to America and prove through the intense interrogation system that they are really brother and sister. And on the way, there's a lot of other characters, and we meet, for example, a Chinese-American interpreter named Carter Lee, who it's inspired by real accounts of interpreters on Angel Island who had to choose between justice for who, justice for themselves or immigrants, or upholding the law, which was exclusionary. So it's just the question of like, oh, will they make it in? And you see that dramatized. I don't know if Sita wants to add anything about the show.
Definitely. So part of the reasons we were so moved to create this show, we visited Angel Island, and there you can see a lot of the historical information, and there's so many helpful exhibits and archives, and we learned about the poetry that the immigrant detainees carved onto the walls of the island, and it's really great poetry.
Yeah.
And so I would like to share some with you. So I'm going to be reading a poem that's a translation of a poem by Huey, who was a detainee on Angel Island, translated from Chinese, and it's encouraging the traveler. Just talk about going to the land of the flowery flag and my countenance fills with happiness. Not without hard work were 1,000 pieces of gold dug up and gathered together. There were words of farewell to the parents, but the throat choked up first. There were many feelings, many tears flowing face to face when parting with the wife. Waves big as mountains often astonished this traveler. With laws as harsh as tigers, I had a taste of all the barbarities. Do not forget this day when you land ashore. Push yourself ahead and do not be lazy or idle. So this poem and like many others like it, they kind of helped us like get the feel of the setting and everything and like what it was actually like to go through that. And you know, it's like this big history of like Asian American art in different forms. So we're kind of trying to portray that in a more modern form.
Yeah, and the other thing that really stood out to us when we were doing the research for the show was that there's this really strong like fighting spirit that you see all the poets carry into the writing, and they're talking about like keeping your dreams alive, making sure that you give yourself a fighting chance, and that's that's sort of like energy that I don't know really resonated with us, especially for me because like both my grandparents were it's a very personal story to me, and yeah we felt like these words were singing and we wanted to sing them.
Great. So shall we?
Yeah, so without further ado, the first song that we're gonna do is called Juk Songs, which is a play on the Cantonese derogatory term Juksing for American-born Chinese, which it means like hollow bamboo. It's the name of the spoken word group where we first workshopped these pieces at Yale. Oh, got it. Just a young Chinaman trying to sail for foreign land. I couldn't afford to be poor.
Thrown from home, brother dead. I'm a fighter, but I fled.
Could there be any hope left on the shore? Who'd have known we'd be placed in a prison for our race? A cage in the ocean
Made of wood. Summer days turn to fall. Sliced a knife into the wall.
mournful strokes carving these words that hurt, but the walls still won.
Our dream inside.
Better life for future sons. Although they're gone, I can still hear them breathe in this song. I keep dreaming of a life in New York City, and I keep believing for you. And although all of our voices on the walls can't sing,
Listen to me.
we're more than just some poems on the wall.
So that's the opening number, which is usually done with like a lot more people and instruments and everything. And it leads into a faster rap song and everything. But we wanted to share this part first because that's kind of reflecting the poetic history and everything. But this show is actually like, incorporates like a lot more fun elements and humor because we kind of wanted to make it like more of a story that was entertaining because a lot of like historical things, sometimes they can get like really depressing and serious. And, you know, in the family history, there's like a lot of really funny stories as well of like, you know, humorous things like people immigrating to the Americas. Like with my parents, I'm just like first generation American, but my parents' names are still all mixed up from moving here, just from India, you know. So there's always like all these funny family stories and all we hear. So this next song we're gonna share is more of a fun song. It's called Fat Pork's Interrogation. So Fat Pork is Slim Chin's best friend from China, and he's the son of a wealthy business owner, and he was actually born in America. So when they're immigrating over on the boats, he has a very cocky attitude. He thinks he's gonna get in no problem because he's an American citizen, but all the people, a lot of people coming in from China, they had to go through these interrogations. So when they're detained, they go through these long questioning sessions where the interrogators will ask them like really obscure details about their life and making sure it matches up with like other people they're supposed to be immigrating into America with. So Fat Pork is not very prepared for this interrogation. Great, so in this song, I will be reading the role of the diabolical Inspector P.B. Jones, who's supposed to be like a very menacing man with a booming baritone voice. So just to ignore that for now. Yeah.
And one other fun fact, I'm going to be doing Fat Pork's part. Something that's kind of interesting about this song is that the questions that you're going to hear are the real questions, more or less, that the interrogators asked my grandfather when he came to the U.S. And you wouldn't believe how many of these are actually real.
Interrogation of applicant 724, interpreting Carter Lee. You are advised your right to admission to this country will be today considered by this board. The regulations state that if your answers to these questions do not match those of your alleged father, William Wong, you will be denied entry to the U.S. Applicant number 724, sworn. State your name, your age, and your place of birth.
Fat Pork, 21, USA for what it's worth.
Married?
No.
Siblings state their name and whereabouts.
7 Wong, New York.
Do you leave any siblings out?
Nope.
Grandparents still alive?
No.
Where's your grandpa buried?
With my grandmother.
In which cemetery?
Valhalla.
New York?
Man, they're trying to break my balls.
Now the house you have in China, how tall are the walls?
Like 20 feet.
Describe the house.
2 floors and a basement.
Describe your roof in detail.
The tiles need replacement.
Which way do the doors face?
The back one faces west.
Where does your dad sleep?
Upstairs.
His house is on the left.
We call him Captain So.
What's his sister's name, this friend?
She's General So.
Street have a dead end?
No.
Where do you live in the States?
Chinatown.
Why are you here now?
Went to China, now I'm back. Must have been a few years now.
Have you ever been to Pike Street?
Yeah.
Describe your last trip.
Street food.
Did you leave a cash tip?
No.
How far in what direction?
East. This is so bad.
Market did you go to?
Didn't know I had to know that.
What kind of pages leads there?
Dirt.
That's not what your father stated.
Probably because it's on the border and borders are complicated.
Next question as part of your application. List the partners doing commerce in this fine name.
Got Sam Kai-chung, William Wong, and my younger brother Devin. Got like 3 to 4 cousins.
Should be more than 7. What's your role in the company?
Huge.
Your father says that isn't true.
You could have been deceived, but you had to check, didn't you?
Any others in China?
No, we're American.
There must be.
Yeah, I got them all. You can trust me. We got, are you some dumb guy? Something wrong with you?
That's enough.
These people don't want me here. These questions are just designed to pin you. My dad and me, we can't agree on what we had for dinner. Yo, what kind of crap questions next in this dialogue?
What is the name and location of your neighbor's sister's dog?
The fuck?
Applicant 724, is that the name or the location? How is it that you don't agree with your own father regarding the name of your neighbor's sister's dog?
Just let me in, I'm his son, I'm so done. Check, please, you're making up these complicated questions to get me deported. Inspector, you think you're some kind of sleuth? Then how come you can't tell that I'm just telling the truth?
Either your pants on fire or your dad's a liar. Heck, not even a cheat sheet could make your chances higher. You ain't the son of a merchant, nor a fine gentry. Can't prove it, I move that you're denied entry.
Ay-ya. Yay. Give it up for Sita! P.B. Jones, yeah.
All right.
Thanks. And what happens in the plot is that the guy who actually has the legal right to be in the U.S., he gets rejected, right?
Right. So this is actually sort of inspired by the Supreme Court case, like Wong Kim Ark versus the U.S., where somebody who was born in the U.S. Was denied entry, and then that sort of like the what followed sort of established the precedent of birthright citizenship, which became a thing in like the previous president's administration, which we sort of
Yeah. It kind of sets the stakes for the main characters in the show who, one of them is the paper son. So he has to like learn all these details in a coaching book so he can avoid what happened to his friend Fat Pork when he gets deported.
And they get in, right? The paper sons.
Yeah, they get in at the end.
Yeah,
And the real U.S. born doesn't. So, so this is your family's story. Can you tell us a little bit about what you knew growing up, and how you got into this story and how you researched it?
Yeah, so it's sort of been like, so I'm sixth generation Chinese American, but and I know there's a lot of people whose families go way back in this side of the country, but where I grew up in New York, it was generally like first gen sort of area, and a lot of people just didn't understand like. I felt like just generally like nobody understood like what my family background was. Like people who were Asian American and first gen like would make fun of me when they met my grandma who didn't speak Chinese and like spoke just American English. And then like non-Asian people just on the street would harass me for being Chinese. So it was sort of like I had this like identity conflict growing up, and it was sort of like I also grew up knowing about like the stories of my grandparents. One side that went through as paper sons, and a lot like in Paper Dreams of Harry Chin, didn't want to talk about it for the longest time, and then the other, and that resulted in a lot of different things with our family names, and then the other side, my grandfather was technically a legal immigrant. He came and was detained on Angel Island at the age of 10 and separated from his family for several months and interrogated with those questions that you heard. And later in his life, there was my mom and her siblings sort of interviewed him about that experience because, like my other grandfather, he also didn't want to open up about it. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's my whole family's like kind of been interested in different angles about this story and what it means to. What it means growing up as an Asian American today. Yeah.
Yeah. Jeffrey, in your case, your connection to the Paper Sons was not direct in that way. What drew you to the story of Harry Chin?
Well, in a lot of the work that I do, when I decided I was going to do theater as my sort of calling in life, I'm first generation. I'm the child of immigrants, so like whatever I chose to do, it's like you better make sure it's worth it, right? So for me, when I chose to be an artist, I needed to sort of answer the why of it, right? And so for me, a big part of my calling to do this was growing up. It was very easy to feel sort of alienated in this country, even living in the Bay Area, not having, the closest thing that I had to any form of representation in like the first 18 years of my school life was like reading the Joy Luck Club in high school. And like I barely related to that. Like I just found out that I'm like an eighth Chinese like last year. I thought I was like not really Chinese, but barely Chinese. And I'm like, oh, I'm an eighth Chinese. And so like that was like the closest thing I had. And so for me, I was really one of the things that like, is a theme throughout the work that I write and direct in my career is sort of uplifting the different stories and the humanity and the experiences of various Asian American communities and specifically Filipino-American communities. And so when I came across the Paper Dreams of Harry Chin, one, I had met the playwright Jessica a little bit ago on a different play that she was working on, and I thought she was just an amazing writer. And then, although I'm not as closely tied to the stories of the Paper Sons as like say Skyler, I did really make a huge connection to the story of a relationship between an immigrant parent and a child who was born in America. So that part really, and one, where the parent isn't really wanting to open up or talk about anything like that sort of like was a big connection point for me. So for me, wanting to like both explore a story like this that I related to in a great way, and also performing this play literally like 3 blocks away from Chinatown, where that is the story of so many of the families that reside there. I wanted to make sure that we did it in an interesting way, an engaging way, and a truthful way, and really respected that story because I knew that having a story about both the Paper Sons and also healing from the treatment of that generation of Chinese American was going to be extremely important and impactful, doing it in the exact location we were doing it in. So for me, it really in a lot of ways felt like sort of I felt like I had a responsibility to sort of foster and deliver this story in the best way possible.
You know, in your own plays and also in a number of plays you directed, including The Paper Dreams of Harry Chin and Viet Gone and The Great Leap, language is really important. And you're also a casting director. And I think you've thought a lot about accents and casting and when characters are speaking their own language and being in their own skin. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's so, one of the things to look at, well, so for In Paper Dreams of Harry Chin, the accents were really important to sort of navigate when someone spoke with an accent and when they didn't. So for example, in The Paper Dreams of Harry Chin, we used accented speech to help identify when people were speaking to each other in their native tongues. So when, for example, Harry and the poet character are on the boat, they're speaking to each other in a dialect of Cantonese. But for the audience, they're speaking in English, and it's like it wouldn't make sense for them to be speaking with an accent because they're speaking in their native tongue. But when we have someone speaking English and we have Harry speaking in English, we give him sort of accented speech, and the other person would not be speaking with they'd be speaking with an American accent. So that was sort of a way to identify all of that. And in a lot of other ways, for example, when I directed the show Viet Gone, where there's none of the Vietnamese characters speak with an accent until the end of the play when the main character ages into a grandfather character, but we put broken, quote unquote, broken language coming from the white characters. Because we were watching the play from the perspective of the Vietnamese characters, and when the white characters were trying to speak to the people in Vietnamese, they were the ones speaking in some broken something. They were just saying things like NASCAR, Botox, Frickles. It was like an actual line in the play. And also, the other tricky thing is like in the work that I'm doing in terms of representation and trying to sort of use storytelling and art to sort of break down barriers and create more understanding and empathy throughout the audiences and through the world. It's sort of reclaiming that we all have accents. Like I speak with a Bay Area accent. I'm born and raised in the Bay Area. I speak with an accent. And if I go somewhere else, they're gonna notice an accent coming from me, right? And for so long, there's sort of this trauma. I keep saying the word trauma, but there's just so much of it. There's this trauma around various Asian and Asian American accents because of the fact that for so long in the media, it has been just used as the easy punchline or as a joke. So for a lot of Asian American performers, I know there's this sort of resistance to perform with an accent. And I did a play called The Language Archive, which didn't really necessarily require accents of all of the characters, and it's actually not even an Asian American specific story, but I directed it in a way where many of the characters were Asian American. And one of the actors I had in it, I was working with Emily Kuroda, who some of you may know from The Gilmore Girls as Mrs. Kim, and the actor Francis Ju from the Bay Area, but has been all over, M. Butterfly, just like an amazing performer. And I remember we were speaking about those two characters, those elders, we gave them accents, and I remember there was a young audience member during a post-show discussion that asked why we decided to give them accents and why they decided to perform with accents. And for one, I was saying, okay, so we were trying to be very mindful of it. So for me, I was like, when we cast Francis and Emily and knew that these were going to be elder Asian American people speaking with an accent, I knew that they couldn't be the only Asian American people in the show, because I didn't want that to be sort of the representation of like, oh, this is what Asian people are. So we had other younger Asian American people that were either first generation or after, like American-born Asian people that were speaking with American accents. So I had that sort of covered. And the other thing that Francis said was like, why wouldn't I be okay with speaking or acting as a character with an accent, because those people exist. and those people are my family members, and it's my job as an actor and my job as an artist to present their stories accurately and with humanity. Because if not from me, then who else is going to do it? I don't want to put that in another person's hands. And where the trauma comes is, for so long the presentation of immigrants and the presentation of people with accents lacked humanity. And so our job is to not erase the presence of non-American accents. The job of ours is to make sure that we present these stories with the humanity and human spirit that they deserve.
And so at this moment, we're not entirely past yellowface or white folks being cast and stereotypically acting as Asians, but it's a lot better than it used to be. And so I'm curious, and we're at a moment when there's a lot of plays by Asian Americans and directed by Asian Americans that can deal with these and other issues with nuance. And I'm curious, Sita and Skyler, how you feel, what level of freedom do you feel in terms of representation, and how do you think of yourselves in kind of the history of Asian American representation in theater and film? And do you think it's maybe different? So we have generations here, we have some age differences. Where do you place yourself?
Yeah, it's really cool because we have this whole generation of like people to look up to who are in New York theater, you know, like David Henry Hwang and Timothy Hwang and all these different people who are like the playwrights that have like really faced those barriers at like such a higher level than we are today. We're still experiencing things like we're in some theater programs where we're the only Asians right now out of like cohorts of, you know, 12 or 16 people. But it's a lot better than it used to be. And, you know, like there was for a long time, like when we were growing up, we still didn't have a lot of that representation. Like I remember for me, I looked up to Katara from Avatar because she was brown, you know, and she's not Indian or anything, but I really looked up to her, you know. She was like, I just felt, you know, really empathetic with her character. But now we have Miss Marvel, we have Never Have I Ever, and all these things. We have like Hassan Minhaj, Lily Singh, and all these people, and like, you know, that's just like with South Asian representation. And now we're seeing like a lot of things too where like people are coming together more to create like Asian representation stories. So like in Illegal, for example, we wanted to include some like Pan-Asian representation because I didn't actually know this growing up, but in Angel Island, lots of different types of people came through there. So there was, you know, in addition to Chinese people, there were some Filipino people, Mexican people, Thai people, Indian people. So we wanted like our show to kind of have some of that, you know, Pan-Asian representation in it. So in our cast, we have people from, you know, different types of like Asian heritage. Yeah. So do you want to?
It is just I mean, well said, and it's just been really cool to get to create, tell our own stories. You know, like to be able to step into the shoes of like, oh yeah, like Paper Sun, who and just really reflect on that experience and the emotional depth of that and portray that humanity, especially with other Pan-Asian people who like we call like our cast right now. We call ourselves like our text group is the Collective Asian Diaspora, to like CAD, like as a as like the name of the text group. And I don't know, it just feels like it feels like we're in a empowering, where we feel empowered to work with each other and do that and represent ourselves how we want.
Yeah, and I say another like cool component to our dynamic is like Skyler is like his family's history, and you know his family's been in the United States for so long, and they speak with like classic American accents and everything. And then my family like doesn't know much about like history of Asian Americans in the United States. So like when they saw the show, they were like, "Wow, that was great," you know, because like they're learning things from this too. So a lot of like Asian people as well, we kind of have this thing that's a story that they get to see and learn from, you know, because not everybody like learns these things in an academic context or, you know, by like reading the history. So it's really cool to like have created something that people can relate to in like all sorts of different ways.
And I just want to mention to the students here that we have our own great Asian American playwright Philip Kangatanda here, teaching in theater, dance, and performance studies. He's going to be teaching a playwriting class centering on these issues in the spring. So if folks are interested, you can look into that. I'll kind of put that generational question back to you, Jeffrey. How do you situate yourself in kind of the history of Asian American theater? Where have we been and where are we going?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Similar to what Sita was saying. I mean, there's just this. Speaking of Frances and Emily and who have done. They were, for lack of a better way of saying it, they were like two of the OGs of Asian American performance in theater, and they were doing the workshops and premieres of Philip Kangatanda's plays, David Henry Hwang's plays, Velina Hasse Houston. It's just like, so we really do stand on the shoulders of giants where they had to, like, whatever barriers we're going through now, which are very real as Asian American theater artists, like whatever they went through was their sort of tenfold, right? Like for me as a writer and director, I'm trying to put Asian American stories and Asian American representation backstage, on stage, all over the place. But for them, they were sort of only called for like the once a year or twice a year. David did a play, Philip did a play, Velina did a play, and then they were called to be the villain in something. And we have there's been a lot of progress made there, not enough progress, right? Like we haven't achieved equality in the least. And so for me, I mean, there's generations and generations before me, but I'm hoping to sort of take the ball and run with it. Speaking of immigration stories, I remember the great director Desdemona Chang was sort of talking about, I've directed a lot of plays that I wasn't really passionate about. But I felt like it was a good career move to sort of get myself, like sort of display my skill set and my way of working. And Desdemona Chang was sort of describing, doing certain pieces and working in some places to then help expand the community that you wanted to include on stages, as sort of like, like the person who like gets their green card first and then they sponsor the rest of their family to come in. In some ways, that was sort of what many of us are doing in the theater world, where we're trying our best to sort of pave our way and do what we can. And then all of the people at, like, you mentioned in my bio, I work at Bindlestiff at South 6th Street in San Francisco, this tiny Filipino-American theater, where, I did 3 shows there and I still don't know how my car didn't get broken into parking on the street every day. And as best as possible as my career I've been very lucky for my career to grow. It's like try to find ways to provide opportunities for all the other people that were there with you in other aspects of it, and other people that might not necessarily have the doors open or have the opportunities. And again, talking about Frances and David and Philip, like I've gotten a lot of my best gigs because someone said, I was talking to Francis Jew and we said we were looking for a director, and he said, do you know Jeffrey Lowe? And so that's the elders sort of holding the door open for you. And I try to do my best to do that as well. So I don't know if I'm actually answering your question, but I'm just trying to say that there's just sort of like, we're taking the ball and passing it to each other and trying to continue running forward until we achieve, hopefully, the equality that we want to, or we achieve the representation that we want to. Because at the end of the day, telling stories, we just want our future generations of children of all communities, me specifically being Filipino-American, Asian American, but all communities, to sort of like grow up and like watch TV, watch theater, listen to music, and feel like they can identify and make it much harder for someone to feel othered in this country. Yeah.
Yeah. So more stories is what we need, not a single story. More stories.
Because that's sort of the pressure, right? Where it's like an Asian. Like I remember I was watching when Chris Rock did the movie Top 5. I was watching this interview where he was talking about like the pressure when like there's a Chris Rock movie, or the pressure when there's a Denzel Washington movie, where the whole African American community is like, this movie has to be good, because if Denzel's movie's not good, we're not going to get another one for another 8 months. Whereas members of more represented communities, they're like, if they didn't like the movie they saw, they can go literally to the next room at the movie theater and see another option where maybe it's going to represent them and maybe they're going to like it, And so we put so much pressure because they're so limited. Like, for example, there's also Jo Koy's movie Easter Sunday. Did anyone see that movie Easter Sunday, the Joe Coy movie, the Filipino movie? I hear it's just okay. Yeah, it's just okay. And it's really a bummer because like when was the last time we had a Filipino movie? It was like 10 years ago. You know, and so it's like you really desperately want it to be great, and the movie's kind of just okay. But at the same time, a Filipino movie should have every right to be just okay. You know, not everything needs to be genius, but the fact that we have so little representation, there's that pressure that everything has to be genius because we have to change the world because there's not enough.
Yeah, right. I mean, Flower Drum Song was one of the first movies to have an all-Asian cast, right? When was that, 60, 62? And then the next one was, what, like 30, 40 years later. So, you know, I think I'll open it up to questions from the audience. And while you're thinking about your questions, and you can pass them on index cards if you have them, I wonder if do you all have any questions for each other?
Let's see.
Yes. But they're still simmering.
Yeah.
Same.
Sorry, jumped out of the blue, but I think I'm looking forward to just chatting with you all about how you get things done, how theater gets made, the nuts and bolts of, you know, how you develop a script. So not specific to Asian American stuff. Tell us a little bit about how you incorporate history, right? So you have this raw material, but it has to be entertaining. It has to be a story. How do you turn something that you want to say into the thing that is theater? What's that process like?
Yeah, I'm thinking about sort of like the Act 1 finale song of our piece, where it's sort of like we wanted to dramatize the. So there was an account by there were several accounts from like Asian American interpreters on Angel Island who were talking about how it felt to like to be working for the law that was keeping people that looked like them out of the country, but you know it was their only good like economic option at the time, for example. And we were thinking, okay, well in the story about people who are coming head to head, like coming to the U.S. and other people trying to keep them out, what would be really a good moment for that? Like how would we write that into a song? And then so I came to Sita and I was like, oh, what sort of like, I don't know, like what sort of musical sound or inspiration would you want for the song? Like I was thinking it would be called "Can't Stop Me Now" because everybody's like, I want to get, you can't stop me from getting in, and the other person's like, well, you can't stop me from kicking you out, you know, like that kind of thing. And then so like we sort of started working on that. I don't know if you want to talk about like how like I had a version that was like really boring and then you made it really exciting.
Yeah, that's like a lot of our process is Skyler's like the history person. I'm more like creative stuff like music and characters and all. So Skyler like came up, like he visited Angel Island first and then he visited these barracks and everything. He was like, okay, I want to write a musical about this. And I was like, okay, sure. And then Skyler would like draft all the ideas and stuff, and then we go through and we're like trying to think of like what type of style of music or what song fits it. So for example, like a rap battle kind of felt like it fit in interrogation and like sort of history of like protest music and all, and you know. And then with other types of songs, we draw from like other sources in like musical theater history and everything. Yeah, so like we take like the ideas for the dialogue, and then you know we kind of write lyrics and music at the same time, and then it's just a cycle of being like, that's like way too on the nose, you know, like you know, like we don't want to be like boring, you know, and then okay, like figuring out how to integrate things in a way that like you can get through it in time and everything, and like it fits like musical structure and all. Yeah, so with that song, like Can't Stop Me Now, it started off like sounding really like peppy.
It was like
kinda.
It was like I don't know. It was just like some EDM kind of like. It was just like. And then like Cedar was like, nah. and then you were like, here, check out this Fall Out Boy song, right?
Yeah.
And then it changed into like By the way, this is your final chance, Miss Lee. It's time you better get it right. And like, I don't know, it just kept going like, there was a part where we were like, oh, you already fired me from my raise, so like, can I get back, can I get my job back? But then we changed that to like, I've been fired for my race already, Lee's on thin ice. It's all riding on the shipment, the ship's in her sights. If Phoebe thinks that I'm unloyal, my future will be soiled. It's imminent immigrant ship, I'm putting you all in a vice. And then, you know, it sort of went from there. So that's sort of like, I don't know, an example of how that changed while we were taking the history and then turning it into music, yeah.
So things evolve. So any questions on paper? Have we collected the cards? Do we have some questions? Okay.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, so one of the questions from the audience is, I know there's a lot of focus on male immigrants in America. Have you thought about the female perspective in your work so far?
Yeah. In my writing, one of the pieces that I have worked on that you had mentioned in my bio is a play called Writing Fragments Home, which is a semi-autobiographical piece which did focus on sort of my mother's experience as an immigrant. It's sort of about the father and daughter, the mother-son relationship in that piece. And with that, like for me at least, you know, that is a Filipino-American play, and for so many Filipino-American families, like the women in the family, both economically and emotionally, are just like holding it down. Like there's just so many families where like if it wasn't for that Filipino-American mom who's just like the rock, like the whole thing would fall apart. And so in that play, that's definitely a piece where I've sort of really reflected upon a lot of the strong women in my experience, you know, especially all my entire generation before me were all immigrated from the Philippines or are still in the Philippines. So yeah, I mean, that's just sort of an example of it, but yeah, I think, and I know that in Quy Nguyen's Viet Gone, there is, you know, the first play in that cycle of plays is definitely focused on, I mean, it's both, it's his parents' love story, but at the same time, it is a little bit more focused on his father's journey, escaping the Vietnam War and being a refugee in Arkansas. But I know in the sequel of it called Poor Yellow Rednecks, which will be done at ACT in May, I think, that really does focus on sort of his mother's journey. And then my understanding talking to Quy, I don't know if he said this out loud to anyone, so like hopefully it's okay that I say this. I think that his intent is for the third play in that cycle to be about his grandmother's journey, who she was a refugee along with her mother. They sort of escaped the fall of Saigon together. So those are some things that are on the horizon in terms of the female perspective of the immigration story.
Cool, yeah. Thank you.
And one of the in our piece, like one of the stories that we heard that we wrote into it that was one of the most inspiring ones to us and was like a straight up story of like the fighting spirit that the immigrants had was the story of Laiwa. I don't know if anybody's heard of Laiwa. She was a real person who came to she was a detainee on Angel Island at the age of 2, right?
Yeah, 2 years old.
2 years old, and she was famous because she talked a lot of smack to the interrogators. At the age of 2, like she was like, if you won't, like, they're like, state your name and your place of birth. And she was like, well, if you don't tell me your name, I'm not telling you my name. and then, like, that story, the way the story goes is that the interrogators were just so charmed by this little girl that they were just like, all right, you, your sisters, everybody, like, just go. It's like, whatever.
Yeah. And as far as, like, other female perspectives in the show, it was, like, a really kind of challenging question to consider because, like, with immigrating to Angel Island, a lot of women didn't make it through compared to the men because they're accused of being prostitutes all the time. So Keelan, like, she's so reliant on Slim Chin to make it through Angel Island as her paper brother because she won't get in without him. So she's kind of, like, making sure that they hold it down, because Slim
Yeah.
Chin's not the best at like memorizing the coaching book and everything, and so she's like the stronger character in the show. And actually, like at the climax of the show, when they're being interrogated by PB Jones, who's like the really mean guy, and his interpreter Carter Lee, who's like an Asian American. Carter Lee, who's a woman, she kind of like mistranslates some things they're saying in order to protect them, after she's been convinced by Keelan and Slim Chin, partly because Keelan connected with her as a woman, about how, like, are you really going to take this from this guy all the time? Like, he's treating you so badly too. Like, are you really going to be the one who, like, prevents us from getting in? So it's like that connection they have as women is kind of what ultimately leads to, like, the happier ending of the show.
Yeah, definitely in your play, the female character, Keelan, is the strong, competent, and good at martial arts one. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so another question for, I believe, Skyler and Sita. It's a two-parter. It's what's your favorite play or musical and why? And is Illegal inspired by any other musical like Hamilton?
Yes, you are exactly right. It was definitely Hamilton.
Yeah.
Like, Hamilton, we were so into it, like, right when we started writing Illegal. And we even, like, we were pre-orientation counselors for this program called Cultural Connections, which was for, like, people of color who were, like, in freshman orientation at Yale. And we even, like, performed Hamilton with them at, like, the talent show kind of thing. So we were really obsessed with Hamilton, for sure.
And then
And, yeah,
right
as
now,
far
I've been obsessed with A Strange Loop. I don't know if you've heard, but we're
Yes.
just singing it like in the shower all day
So
long.
good. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. And then the last question I have from the students is, do you ever feel intimidated, and how do you deal with nerves?
That's a good one. I guess it's kind of like the more you do it, the less intimidated you get. I don't know. I guess it depends. Like I feel pretty. I feel like everybody. I feel like the room is very comfortable here today. But a lot of the time, especially when we're going on stage and then there's a huge tech malfunction or like miscommunications, then like the nerves start to pile up. But I don't know if you.
Yeah. I started off with, like, no performance experience. And in college, everybody was, like, doing a cappella and stuff all the time. And I, like, didn't know anything, really. Like, I played the violin, like, not very well in high school. And so, but I just loved music. Like, I loved writing, like, and composing and stuff. And then I kind of discovered that, like, to become an artist, it's really helpful to be able to perform your own stuff. For, like, talks, for example, because, you get to be the writer and you get to show something. And, so as far as, like, nerves and stuff, I think, like, just getting into that role of, like, actually performing things or talking about your work and all, it really helps. And then you just kind of get used to things after you've done so many times. It's like sometimes something doesn't land as well as you wanted, like a joke or, I don't know, like a song, your voice might crack, but you just get over it a lot faster after you've done it several times.
And I guess, for today, I was like, oh, well, like, I was on the plane, my voice is so dry, like, I was, like, getting nervous. But then I was like, oh, well, like, we're the writers, we're not, like, Broadway singers, so, like, you get what you get.
Yeah, and a lot of times, like, when I'm nervous about, like, presenting things, I just go do the creative thing instead. Like, I write the next show, and then I remember, like, why I like doing this a lot. So, yeah, going back to, like, what I really enjoy the most, which is, like, the music and the story and everything, that always makes me feel, like, more comfortable sharing it.
Yeah. So you've brought up kind of the connection between writing and performance, and I wanted to ask Jeffrey about the connection between playwriting and directing and the other roles that you play in theater. How are they all connected, and how do those also relate to your, to everyday life and what everybody's going through right now?
Well, I'd say in theater, it's always good to know how to do a little bit of everything. And so I when I was in school, I learned a little bit of lighting design. I've done a little bit of sound design. You know, I write, I direct, I've cast, I acted long ago. I'm not good at it, so I don't do it anymore. And I don't know. I think that for me, the writing and directing, they speak to each other, but I try to not do both at the same time. But for me, like the directing is informed by the playwriting, by the way that I handle text, and the way that when I sit around at the table, like I call it, I English major the play with my actors for the first 3 days of rehearsal if we have enough time to do that, and we really break down the text, and I break down the punctuation, and I break down the stage directions and everything that we have there. And that all comes from the playwriting aspect of things. And then for myself as a playwright, it's informed by the directing because, for example, although I don't tend to direct my own work, I never write something like, you know, like you'll a lot of people will get a note. Like if you read a lot of new plays by young playwrights, a lot of time there'll be a note where it's like this is a movie. They've written a movie, but they're submitting this to a theater, and there's no way to produce this on stage without like having to wait every 5 minutes for a 5-minute scene change, right? And for me as a playwright, I've never written a part of a play where I did not envision at least a solution in my head as a director. And I'm not going to tell you what it is because I want everyone else to have, like, for me, scripts that I write, scripts are blueprints because theater is a collaborative art form. It's, you know, playwriting is a collaborative art form, even though it's very solitary in the beginning. So I want the director, I want the actors, I want everyone to sort of bring themselves to it. Because if I wanted to be doing 100% of it, I would have just written a novel. And so for me, it's a collaborative art form. But you know, as a director, I'm not going to write the impossible thing. In Sarah Rule's Eurydice, I directed it. And we went through great pains to create the elevator made of water, which is a stage direction that, you know, you want to honor that. And then she has a stage direction where it says, perhaps blueberries fall from the sky. And I said, you said perhaps, Sarah, so perhaps they won't because we can't afford that. And so that's sort of how all of those things inform all of that. I don't know. And then how does being a director and a playwright sort of inform the rest of my life? I think although I lead, like my life, so much of my life is my time is consumed by the creation of theater and the creation of story and the creation of art. At the end of the day, I'm trying to just be a leader for change and a leader for a better world. So the way I run a rehearsal room is sort of how I try to lead in life, right? So the reason I think we spoke about this, the reason I don't write and direct my own plays is because I direct through questions. I like to ask a lot of questions. I think that my job as a director is to, one, acknowledge that everyone else knows how to do their job better than I know how to do their job. I'm not going to tell a lighting designer how to do their job because they know how to design lights better than I do. I'm not going to tell an actor how to act because I can't act as well as they can. But I'm here to sort of help create a room where everyone can take the biggest risks as artists and feel safe doing it. And whether or not your really crazy idea is the idea we're going to use, I'm not guaranteeing we're going to use your idea, but I guarantee that you will feel safe to make that choice. And if we're not going to go with it, you're not going to feel shame. You're not going to feel scared to do it again. We're just going to have a discussion and we're going to find what the right choice we want to make is. And I don't do that when I'm writing plays because it's hard to direct through questions when you wrote the play. Because I'm like, well, what do you think about that line? Like, I don't know, you tell me. And like the first time that happened, I'm like, oh, I can't do this. This is not going to work for me because they're just going to keep having me tell them what to do, and that is not how I like to act as a leader. Now, I'm not saying that's the only way to do it. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it necessarily. It's the right way for me. There's lots of directors who will just tell you what to do, but that never works for me and how I like to do things. I will say the one thing, more so than maybe, you guys are students, maybe they don't want me saying this. In my education as a theater and journalism major at UC Irvine, the thing that I probably use more than any class, any educational thing in my career now as a theater maker is my 3 years being a resident advisor. And like leading 80 freshmen every year, creating programs, and supporting them and trying to like help them figure out who they wanted to be or what they wanted to do in college, that work in housing probably is where most of my college experience still finds itself in the work that I do today.
When I hire students or anybody for work, if somebody has been a camp counselor for multiple years, that is a big plus, because logistics, people, snacks, it's important stuff. And I really appreciate the way that you said you basically you want to make the world a better place, but it's not necessarily through through political theater, but it's how you behave in your everyday work, and that's really inspiring. So we need to wind up, but I want to ask whether you all, as recent students, do you have anything you want to share or advice or encouragement to the students who are here?
Yeah, I'd say we wrote this piece while we were in college, and we performed it in the senior spring, and I'd say if does anybody write? Anybody want? Yeah. I'd say if just definitely do it. Don't let anybody tell you don't do it.
And just be confident in it, and now I get to make a living at it. When I moved to New York, I had a different job as I was trying to figure things out, but it's pretty cool to go around and perform, and it's so much more fun than working in an office for me, because you get to be on stage, and then you get to talk to people, and they're all coming up to you and they're like, I love the show and stuff. And I also just love working with actors and other writers and people who make music and stuff, and I've gotten to meet so many people through it. So it's really rewarding. So just be confident and push through, because I know a lot of people don't think it's a good way to make a living and all, but it's just if you keep going, you can definitely do it. So
Can I'll also say, for anyone who's a writer, and also all of you, I know that even if you don't fancy yourself a writer, you're at least writing essays because you're students. The one piece of advice I'll give you, and I think this also holds true for essay, I haven't written an academic essay in a long time, which I'm reminded by the fact that when we were talking about the different generations, Sita pointed at me and said, well, our elders, which has never happened. That's never happened to me before. That's the first time that has ever happened to this 33-year-old person. But thank you. I appreciate that a great deal. But I will say, for people who want to write creatively and otherwise, just finish the first draft and don't edit yourself. Don't edit yourself until you finish the first draft, because you will never finish. The job of your first draft is to not be the final draft. The job of your first draft is to not be good. The job of your first draft is to be the first draft. And once you finish the first draft, you can worry about the rest later. Because you can edit something to be good, but you can't edit something to be good when it's not finished yet. So just get to the end of the first draft, get to end of play, get to fin, get to end of the essay, then worry about it afterwards. Because if you keep editing the first paragraph, you will never get to the second paragraph, the third paragraph, fourth paragraph, or fifth paragraph. And that, as your elder, is the advice I will leave you with.
Great. Well, thank you. And please join me in giving warmest thanks to Skyler, Sita, and Jeffrey.
Thank you so much for having us. This has been really fun.
yeah, thank you. All right.
And as always, we need to clear out and get into the lobby so we can go outside and chat, but we can't chat in here.